Cloudnative Poster Series, with Cheryl Hung of the Cloudnative Computing Foundation.
Cloudnative, SD-WAN, analytics, machine learning, agile development and testing, edge computing, DevOps, service management, enterprise architecture, hybrid IT, neural networks, cybersecurity, serverless, low-code, no-code, big data, integration. You're listening to the Intellyx podcast, where we bridge modern and legacy technology and untangle the buzzwords to help business and IT leaders connect the dots to achieve digital transformation. Disclaimer: the perspectives expressed in this show are the independent opinions of the hosts and/or guests and do not necessarily reflect the position of Intellyx or any companies mentioned here. And now, your hosts, Jason English.
Welcome to the Intellyx podcast and show. Basically, we're doing a series of thought leaders and people who are involved in the cloud native community as we introduce our cloud native computing poster. Our media sponsor for that, of course, is the CNCF, which is kind of a fulcrum around which a lot of this community revolves. And joining me today is Cheryl Hung. She's the Director of Ecosystem for the CNCF. So welcome to the show, Cheryl. Thanks, Jason. It's awesome to be here. Yeah, I think most of our audience is probably familiar if they downloaded the poster, but they may not have had any engagement with the CNCF. So, what does the organization do?
Fundamentally, it's an open source nonprofit. It's underneath the Linux Foundation, which obviously hosts Linux. And then we have a bunch of sister foundations around blockchain, networking, lots of other open source infrastructure pieces. So CNCF obviously is most famous for hosting Kubernetes, but also hosts about 40 open source projects in total. So the goal of CNCF is to really sustain and grow the communities around these projects to make sure that, when we're using and relying on cloud native, we have all the good bits about open source, all the eyes on it, and picking out the bugs and just making it useful for everybody.
Yeah. How do your efforts help promote this, cloud native landscape of both practitioners and then a lot of the other companies that are involved?
We have quite a few different things. In fact, you could argue that awareness and promotion of the open source projects is one of the core functions of the CNCF. So we do a lot of events, at least we would normally. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're not doing any in-person events at this time. But we go and spread the word about it. We produce case studies about different companies that are adopting cloud native and the journey that they've taken. The cloud native landscape, as you mentioned just a minute ago, actually the cloud native landscape, the one with all the logos on it, that's another initiative from the CNCF to show off all the products and companies that are involved in this space.
I know the rate of development is probably accelerated exponentially, right, over the last few years especially. What challenges do you think companies have as they're approaching using a set of open source technologies and moving on this cloud native journey that you see so far?
So as Director of Ecosystem, I primarily work with end users. So these are companies that are adopting cloud native. And in a sense, you could say that I'm an end user of sorts myself, because I started out as an engineer at Google, writing code and deploying it using Borg, and Borg later inspired Kubernetes. So I'm very, very interested and passionate about how companies are adopting cloud native. And some of the challenges that I see today, so I got into this space in 2016, 2017. And I would say compared to that time, a lot of the fundamentals are now pretty solid. So how do you deploy and configure Kubernetes? How do you monitor it? How do you auto scale it? These are well understood problems now. I think the challenge has moved to things like, should you be using a service mesh to control your networking? What's the security story? And also just the general complexity and the understanding around the solution. Like, how do you bring the SRE mindset or the DevOps mindset to the development teams.
It seems like there are a lot of the newer projects tend to focus on security, governance, a lot of the kind of higher order aspects rather than just the development and deployment of the software itself, right?
Totally. I mean, instead deploying it and configuring it is actually fairly straightforward now. It's all the day two operations that we're still finding hard. And in fact, CNCF has a great case study just released a couple of weeks ago for the US Air Force. So the US Air Force are really trying to bring the DevSecOps model, and they've deployed Kubernetes and Istio onto fighter jets without changing any of the legacy hardware. Wow. So going from running Ada to running, Go, Kubernetes, Istio, like a full modern cloud native stack. And they achieved that in 45 days. So it's a really fun one to watch. You can check out if you search for the CNCF YouTube channel and the US Air Force, you can find that.
I'll definitely look for that, and I'll put that link in the show notes here. That's kind of interesting. It seems like we're seeing a trend where a lot of people talk about cloud native and they just automatically associate it with Kubernetes. But really, it's more of an overall mindset about just running workloads wherever they really make the most sense, right? So it's kind of that portability, and that sort of capability seems to define it. How would you see that definition emerging these days?
It's definitely changed, because originally it was just containers, orchestration, microservices, right? Mm-hmm. You do that and you were done. And that's changed over time because of things like serverless coming up, which is quite a different paradigm. But an interesting stat is that in 2019, we ran a survey. So we asked people, why do you actually deploy cloud native? Like, what are the benefits that you're getting out of it? And the number one reason that people use cloud native is because they want to deploy faster, more frequently. So being able to not deploy on a quarterly or monthly cadence, but on a daily or weekly or multiple times a day. And I think cloud native is more about that automation and smoothing that pipeline out than it is about, do you use Kubernetes or not?
Yeah, I'm sure that a big part of this, part of your mandate is really to increase the level of education of the overall community. It seems like the number one complaint I see especially among the larger corporations, is that they don't have enough talent to support these environments. And kind of what can be done to kind of help move that effort along, do you think?
Well, this is why it's great to be on podcasts like this, right? This is the community. This is us sharing what we know with people who maybe have heard about it, but they're not sure where to look. So things like this kind of peer-to-peer sharing fuels a lot of open source and fuels cloud native, really. In terms of a big company, I would recommend that you could also look at the Certified Kubernetes Administrator program if you were looking for a more formal training curriculum. So the content for that is all open source. It is a certification that you can pay for to get a name, but if you just look at the content, it actually provides a really good overview of all the important principles and fundamentals around operating cloud native stacks. But also, as I said, you should be in the community. You will learn more by going to meetups and listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos and attending some of the online calls than you will from, sitting and reading a book.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know when there'll be a next Kubecon, but that seems to be where we see a lot of activity swirling around there. So until then, we're online and we all have to learn and network.
Yeah.
So I guess
Kubecon is great. Like I said, when it comes back, I will definitely be there. So I hope to see some of you there as well. In fact, we have just opened the registration for the virtual Kubecon, the one that is replacing Amsterdam this year. So, it's not the same, but at least we try and sort of stay together as a community. And in fact, compared to many places, open source is actually in a really good position to weather all these changes because we're all used to working remotely and connecting remotely anyway.
Yeah, and it can be more driven by, basically the results you're producing and not the bottom line like other companies that are driven by shareholder value. It's like we have to get work done.
I have nothing against, there's nothing against companies like making money or anything like that. Like vendors are as much a part of the community as anybody else. But it is nice to have one place where, everything's going to be open source. There's just going to be, architects and peers and technical people talking amongst themselves. So
excellent.
It's great fun.
I guess the last question, Cheryl, would be, what do you see as a trend to watch over the next 1 or 2 years in this space?
So before I joined the CNCF, I was a DevOps manager at a cloud-native storage company, StorageOS. And I thought when I joined that running persistent storage would be a solved problem within a couple of years. And I think it's still very, very hard to run databases within a cloud-native stack. And I think there are changes that are coming up around this, like understanding how to run stateful applications and persistent storage. But for me personally, that's one area that I have a lot of fondness for, and that's where I'm excited to keep track of in the next few years.
Yeah, I guess we'll see a lot of evolution there. It is definitely an area to watch, how to solve data storage in a stateless environment and where that's going to go in the near future.
It's definitely a hard problem. Yeah, it's a hard problem, but one that everybody needs solved. So I think that's why I find it exciting.
Well, thanks, Cheryl. Is there a place to go look you up other than, I guess they could go to the cncf.io site, but any other resources you'd recommend as a starting point?
I would say come to Kubecon, first of all. Come to the virtual Kubecon.
Mm-hmm. Anything else interesting you wanted to share, Cheryl?
Yeah, so we've got the 2020 version of the CNCF survey coming out around now. So please go and check it out. We'll have a lot of information from a lot of different developers, and it'll be all information about the benefits that they're getting from Cloud Native, what are the challenges they see, what are the tools that they're using. So it's really, really good information. We put an anonymized version out on GitHub as well. So if you wanted to go and actually check it out and run your own analysis, you can do that. So I'd say please check out the 2020 survey.
Excellent. I'll put that link in there too, so we can get some involvement. All right. Well,
awesome.
Appreciate your time, Cheryl, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jason. It's been really fun.
Yeah. And that concludes our program.
Thank you for listening to the Intellyx podcast. If you have any questions or ideas for future episodes, feel free to drop us an email at pr@intellyx.com. Until next time, keep on transforming.